Hello everyone and welcome back. Today our video is going to be about how to use synthetic division with polynomial division. The first thing we need to identify is dividend versus divisor. So what is a dividend and what is a divisor? The way that I think of it is that the dividend is the one that is being divided. So this is commonly found in the numerator if you're looking at it in terms of a fraction. The divisor is the one that's doing the dividing. And it's commonly found in the denominator if you're looking at it in terms of a fraction. So I'll highlight the dividend in green and the divisor in yellow so that we can see how many places or the different formats you might see it in. So the dividend for all of these is going to be 4. And you can see how they are mostly in front of the 2 except for in this last format, the fraction bar, or sorry, the division bar. And then the divisor, it's always going to be the 2 in this example. And it's normally after the 4 except for in the division bar once again. So now let's look at polynomials. So what is the definition of a polynomial? It's a mathematical equation involving the sum of powers in one or more variables multiplied by coefficients. Now coefficients are going to be so important in synthetic division. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of the coefficients we see in these examples. First one, x squared plus 2x plus 1. Now we obviously don't see a number in front of the x squared, which means that it must be 1 because anything multiplied by 1 is itself, so we can basically disregard the 1. But either way, our 1 is here. So I'll highlight the coefficients in yellow. So our coefficient here is 1, 2, and then our 1 back here is going to be called a constant. And it's not a coefficient because we don't have an x next to it. So it's just going to be a constant. It's not a coefficient. So let's move on. Let's look at the coefficients here. We can obviously see 2. And then this one is actually a little bit tricky. So like our x squared in this one, we don't see a number here, but that must mean that it's -1. The negative is going to be there because that determines the sign, but the 1 doesn't always have to be there. So in this case, our coefficient is -1. And then our 3 is our constant, once again. Our 3x to the 4th minus 6x to the 3rd minus 5x plus 10. Okay, let's look at the coefficients here. 3, -6, -5, and then our 10 is the constant. So this is pretty self-explanatory. You just are looking for the number that's in front of the x value to find the coefficient. And these aren't the only examples that you can find coefficients from. I encourage you to look up online a couple of polynomials so that you can identify coefficients if you need a little bit of help with that. Okay, now let's look at how to find the factor of a polynomial. So I have 2 examples here, and these aren't the only 2 ways to find a factor of a polynomial. But one important thing you need to know first is FOIL. And if you've never heard of this, it's a method to find or to factor a polynomial. So it stands for first, outside, inside, and last. So obviously F, O, I, and L. And I think we should definitely use this method, or at least recognize this method in the first example we have here. So we have x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. Now how are we going to factor this? So we know that if we factor this equation, it's going to end up in the form of x plus or minus something times x plus or minus something. We don't know the signs yet, that's why I put plus or minus, but ultimately it's either going to be a plus or a minus. So we know that it's going to come out in this form, and this is where FOIL comes in. So let's say we have a term here, x plus y or x plus y, like this. The way that we're going to get from here to here is by FOIL. So let me explain to you how it works. So FOIL is first. So this is how we get our x squared term in the beginning. So like we have our x squared here, we're going to have our x squared here. So that's how we get our first term. First, outside. Now the outside terms, x times y. So plus x times y. Plus our inside terms, so another x times y. And then our our last terms, which is y times y. So y squared. So if we look at our equation above, we see that we already have our x squareds right here. So the most that we can do with this is already recognize that we have our two x's in the first positions over here. But what we don't know yet is what our y squared is, which we can find out by linking it to this one. So our y squared is equal to 1, or 1 squared. So the way that we can find our y's in this position here is basically finding the square root. So what multiplies together to get positive 1? So let me clean this up a little bit so that we can find this out. So what multiplies together to get 1? Positive 1. So we can have either 1 times 1, positive 1 times 1, or we can have negative 1 times negative 1. Either way, they equal to positive 1. Now, to find out if it's positive or if it's negative, you want to look at the sign of the second term. So the second term is positive 2x. And the way that we're going to find this is look at the sum. So does positive 1 plus positive 1 equal to 2, or does negative 1 minus 1 equal to 2? And in this case, it's going to be positive 1 times positive 1. So we are going to use these two numbers and plug them into the y spots. So I will erase this so that we can continue solving. So we have x plus 1. Remember, we decided it was going to be positive 1 times positive 1. And x plus 1 is equal to 0. Now this is our final answer. The way that we can find x from here is set x plus 1 equal to 0 and x plus 1 equal to 0. And to find x, you just subtract both sides by positive 1 and you get negative 1. X is equal to negative 1. So ultimately, x is equal to negative 1 in this equation. Now moving on, to solve this one, I will be using a method called factoring by grouping. And grouping is basically finding two terms or terms that basically have common factors so that we can take out those factors and simplify the equation from there. So if I were to group these, I would group it by 3x cubed minus 6x squared, and then negative 8x plus 16, because I found common factors. In this one, in the first one, I would factor out 3x squared, and I would be left with x minus 2, because if we multiply this by this, so 3x squared times x times, 3x squared times x minus 3x squared times 2, we would get 3x cubed minus 6x squared. But this is the first half. Now, if I want to factor out from here, I would factor out negative 8. And I would be left with x minus 2 is equal to 0. And this is so cool because now we have two of the same factors. So we know that x minus 2 is going to be a factor of this equation up here. So if we continue with this, x minus 2, then we were left with 3x squared minus 8. So if you take these, two and you combine them together to get this, then you need to have 3x squared minus 8 as your second factor. And this is basically all we can do to figure out what our factors are for this equation, because this is all that we can factor to. But if we want to factor and find our x, then this one would be x minus 2 is equal to 0, x is equal to 2. And this one would be 3x squared minus 8 is equal to 0, 3x squared is equal to 8, x squared is equal to 8 divided by 3, which means that x is equal to plus or minus square root of 8 divided by 3. Which is also equal to plus or minus 2 root 3 over 3, root 3. And if you want to rationalize the denominator, it would be equal to, times root 3 times root 3. It would be equal to 2 times 3 is 6. Oh, sorry, 2 times 3 divided by 3. It would be equal to 2, plus or minus 2. So you would have these answers. And since we already have plus 2 here, you would need to determine if minus 2 was an adequate solution of the equation. But that is how you factor a polynomial using the two methods I showed you, FOIL and factor by grouping. So we can finally move on to synthetic division now that we have a greater understanding of how to factor. So let's look at our first example, x squared minus 7x plus 10 divided by x minus 1. So if we are given that x minus 1 is a factor of this equation, then we know that x minus 1 is equal to 0, x is equal to 1. So 1 would be a factor. The way that we set up a synthetic division or division bar is that we put the dividend, which is 1 in this case, and then we put the coefficients of each of these terms in our original equation. So this would be 1, -7, and +10. And then we would have a bar at the bottom to basically separate our answer from our work. So the first thing you do in synthetic division is you bring down your first term. So whatever it is, you bring it down. Then you multiply this term by your number in the box. So 1 times 1 is going to be 1. And you always add in synthetic division. So -7 plus 1, that is -6. And once again, you multiply -6 by +1, and you get -6 again. And then 10 plus -6 is 4. So if we're left with a number in this spot, it means that we have a remainder. So the way that we would write out our answer is, well, first we need to find the position. So this would obviously be x squared plus -6x, and then plus your remainder. But if we were to have more terms, you would need to match up the x squared or the -6x based off of how many terms there are. And I'll show you this in a later example because right now it might sound a little bit confusing. So now our final answer would be minus 6x plus 4 divided by, and since 4 is our remainder, we want to divide it by what we were originally starting with. And that would be x squared minus 7x plus 10. So this is our final answer in terms of the synthetic division we just learned how to do. Okay, great. So now let's move on to this one. 2x cubed plus 3x squared minus 6x plus 1 divided by x minus 1. In this case, x minus 1 is equal to 0, x is equal to 1, so we know that we're dividing by the factor of 1 again. So 1, we're going to put this in our box and we're going to list out the coefficients of all of our terms. So 2, 3, -6, and 1. Put down our bar and get to solving. So we bring down our first term, 2. 2 times 1 is 2. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 times 1 is 5. -6 plus 5 is -1. -1 times 1 is -1. And 1 plus minus 1 is 0. So in this case, we have 0 remainder. So we know that definitely x minus 1 is a factor of this original equation. So we can write out our final answer. Remember how I said we have to match it with how many Okay, great. I have to do this again. Okay, so let's start off with, Okay, so let's look at this equation, x squared minus 7x plus 10 divided by x minus 1. So if we're given this x minus 1, we know that x minus 1 is equal to 0, x is equal to 1. So we're going to be dividing by 1. So the way that we set this up is we have a number, the divisor, so the one that's doing the dividing, in a box in the upper left corner. And then we have to list out our coefficients of the original equation. So the coefficient of x squared minus 7x and then 10. And obviously 10 is also going to go here even though it's a constant. But first let's list out the coefficients in order. So coefficient of x squared is going to be 1. Coefficient of negative 7x is negative 7. And then we list out our 10 right here. And then we draw a bar to separate our work from our answer. And the first thing we always do in synthetic division is bring the first number down. So we're bringing the 1 down. Then we multiply our number that we just brought down by the number that is in the box up here. So 1 times 1 is 1. And then using these two numbers, we always add in synthetic division. So negative 7 plus 1 is negative 6. And the same thing goes for here, negative 6 times positive 1, in the box up here is equal to negative 6. And then 10 plus negative 6 is negative 4. Great, so now what we're going to do is we're going to have to match up our terms. So let's say we just had an equation like x squared plus x plus our constant, I don't know, y, and then so on. Now we're going to have to match up our terms like x plus y or x squared plus x or x squared plus x plus y with the terms that we see here. So if we have a number in this spot, this means that it's a remainder. So negative 4 is a remainder in this case. So we know that x minus 1 is a factor, but it has a remainder. So we're looking at specifically 1 and negative 6. Now, if we were to find an equation like this, x squared plus x plus y, we start from the right to the left. So negative 6 would match up with the y, which is our constant, and 1 would match up with our x. But if we were to have another term here, like 2, then our x squared would be 2. But in general, it's good to note that if we start off with an x squared, we're never going to have an x squared in the answer. And you can apply that rule for the next few problems that we're doing. So in this case, our answer would be x minus 6, and then our remainder would be minus 4 over our original equation or original problem. X squared minus 7x plus 10, because we're putting the remainder over the original. And that is going to be your answer for this equation. So let's move on to this one. 2x cubed plus 3x squared minus 6x plus 1 divided by x minus 1. Let's start off with this first. Again, x minus 1 is equal to 0, x is equal to 1. And then we put our 1 in the box up here, list out our coefficients. So 2, positive 3, negative 6, and 1. And we draw our bar down here. We bring our 2 down. 2 times 1 is 2. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 times 1 is 6. 5 times 1 is 5. Sorry about that. And then negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1. Negative 1 times positive 1 is negative 1. And 1 minus 1 is going to be 0. So we have a 0 remainder. And this means that x minus 1 is a factor of this original problem right here. So the way that we're going to write this out is, remember, we want to find out if our terms match like this. We can even have some x cubed. So starting from right to left, our -1 matches up with the y, 5 matches up with x, and 2 matches up with x squared. So if we were to take this and formulate it into an answer, we would get 2x squared, so the 2 always goes in the coefficient, plus 5x minus 1, and then our remainder is 0, so you don't need to do anything after that. So this is our final answer for this problem. Awesome, so we have one more problem to do, and then we can move on to the try it section and we'll be done. So x minus 3. X minus 3 is equal to 0, which means that x is equal to 3. We're going to be dividing by 3, our divisor. So we're going to take our coefficients again, but notice how there is no simple x term. There's x cubed and x squared, but there's no x term. So I'll get to that in a second. So our coefficient for our x cubed is 1. Coefficient for x squared is -4. And then if we have no x term, that means our coefficient is 0, because if we have 0x, that equals to 0 and plus 0. But there's really no need to show it in our equation, so that's why there's no x. But either way, we still have to plug in that 0 because it still holds a value, that x term, especially in synthetic division. And then finally, we write our -5 here. So we draw our bar, bring down our 1, and now we can get started. So 1 times 3 is 3. -4 plus 3 is -1. Again, we're going to multiply. -1 times 3 is -3. 0 minus 3 is -3. -3 times 3 is -9. And then we have a large remainder here, so this is going to be -14. And remember, we want to match up our x's and y's, so let's say we have, or not our x's and y's, our x's and our coefficients, so x squared or x cubed plus x squared plus x plus y. And these are just placeholders. Our -3 would match up with our constant, our -1 would match up with our x, and our 1 would match up with our x squared. So if we take that and we find our answer, we get that x squared coefficient is 1, minus x coefficient is -1, minus 3 minus 14 over our x cubed minus 4x squared minus 5. And this is going to be your final answer using synthetic division for this problem. Awesome. Okay, so I have this try it section. So if you think you guys want some extra practice and you guys want to solve these problems, pause the video right now and do this. And you can email your answers to us and we will definitely check them over and make sure that you guys got it correct, and we can help you out with that too. So pause the video right now and try to solve these. Awesome. So let's review what we did today. Synthetic division. We looked at the difference between a dividend and a divisor. We looked at the definition of a polynomial and some examples, especially with coefficients. Then we learned how to factor a polynomial, which took quite some time. And then we finally got to synthetic division, which is actually not as hard as it seems. So remember, in synthetic division, you always have the divisor. I always get those two confused. Divisor and then the coefficients over here. And then you have your bar, or whatever you want to call it. And then you have your coefficients of your answer. So I'll write answer coefficients. And then in your last box over here, if you do have one, this is going to be your remainder. And your remainder always goes over the original problem, divided by whatever your factor is, x minus 1. Awesome. Well, that sums it up for today's video, and I hope you guys learned a lot from it. I know that it's kind of long, but we definitely covered a lot of stuff today. If you have any questions, please email us at exceledlearning@gmail.com. Leave us a like on this video, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who you think it might benefit. We're really trying to help out people in this situation during the pandemic, and we would love if you could share this with anyone who you think it might benefit. We'll see you later. Bye.